So Amber Heard is claiming that she's stateless, so she can't be sued by her insurance company. Let's talk about it. All right. So with this case, I have to give you a little background. Amber Heard is being sued by her insurance company. Its name is New York Marine and General Insurance Company. And they are suing Amber because they don't want to cover the cost of litigation for her defamation suit. Now, to truly understand why her insurance company is suing her, we need a little background. So, as we all know, Amber Heard was sued by Johnny Depp for intentionally defaming him. In that defamation trial, Amber Heard had insurance against defamation. Now, Amber Heard was covered by two companies. It was New York Marine and Travelers Insurance Company. Now, Travelers paid the bulk of Amber Heard's legal defense. I think it was in excess of $6 or $7 million. Now, New York Marine also covered some costs to the Amber Heard defense by sending their own attorney to help with Amber in her battle against her ex-husband, Johnny Depp. But I think it's interesting to note that New York Marine didn't spend nearly as much as Travelers did on Amber Heard's legal defense. So, as we all know, Amber Heard was found liable of intentionally defaming Johnny Depp and was ordered to pay a little bit over $10 million to her ex-husband. So Amber Heard appealed that judgment, and it seems like Travelers may be covering the cost of that appeal, but we're not too sure. But she's definitely appealing that judgment. So now, at this point, Travelers Insurance Company, who was out millions of dollars in legal defense, they sued New York Marine saying that, hey, you guys also insure Amber Heard and should cover half the cost of litigation because, we both are insuring her as our clients. So after Travelers sued New York Marine to get some of that insurance money back, New York Marine then sued Amber Heard, claiming that she was found liable of intentionally, and again, this is important, intentionally defaming Depp. And by law, that allowed them to refuse to cover any of Heard's legal fees or bills because she essentially intentionally committed this tort. Now, there is a universal principle in insurance that insurance companies do not cover intentional acts, but accidents. Here's an example why. Let's say you have fire insurance on your home and you don't like the way your home looks and you want a new home. Well, if insurance companies cover intentional acts, then you can essentially set your house to fire, let it burn, and then go to the insurance company and say, hey, I had a fire, I intentionally did it, and now you have to build me a new house. The insurance company wouldn't pay out for that intentional act. Matter of fact, in most states, that's illegal. Now, obviously, you see the issues on why insurance companies can't cover intentional acts because they would be out of business pretty quickly, like in our fire example. Now, if you take that example and put it to this case, Amber Heard was found liable of an intentional act, essentially setting her own house on fire. So that's why New York Marine is saying, well, we don't insure intentional acts, and the law allows us not to insure intentional acts. So the timeline went: first, Travelers sued New York Marine, claiming New York Marine failed to pay Amber Heard's legal defense. Then New York Marine sued Amber Heard, claiming she intentionally defamed Depp, as evidenced by the jury verdict, and they did not cover her legal bills. So now I just want to pause for 1 second. This was a super simple explanation of something that's a lot more complex, but I think it gives you enough background so we can get into the meat and potatoes of this video. Now, essentially what's going on is that since both of these cases really were all about the same thing, both the New York Marine and Travelers case and the New York Marine versus Amber Heard case, they're really all about the same thing. So the court said, hey, let's just all combine them because it doesn't make sense to have two trials when all the witnesses and evidence and everything are really the same in both cases. And even a lot of the claims are similar. So the court said, let's consolidate them and just put them all under one roof. Now, this is where we get into the whole stateless argument. So Amber Heard is claiming that New York Marine's lawsuit is improper because the court in which New York Marine filed didn't have jurisdiction over Amber Heard, essentially didn't have authority. And Amber Heard gave two reasons why. The first reason is she said that there was no diversity of citizenship, which is required by federal law. That we'll talk about in a second. The second reason is that she believed that this case would hurt her chances of appeal because if she wins, then New York Marine's argument that she had this judgment against her for an intentional tort would be moot. Right? If the appeals court throws out the jury verdict, then New York Marine's argument is non-existent, and then they would have to pay. So now Amber Heard is saying that, hey, there's no final judgment here. So we should hold this case or stay this case until after the appeal because if I win on the appeal, then they have to fund my lawsuit. But if I lose on appeal, then we have a different issue. But the first step would be the appeal to determine if New York Marine will be able to cover her case or not. So that reason was pretty much self-explanatory. But now let's talk about the diversity of citizenship issue. Now, a lot of people are like, what the hell is that? Well, since I'm a legal channel, let me explain it to you. See, the federal courts are limited into the types of cases they can hear. If you look at this chart, it explains when federal courts have the ability or the jurisdiction to hear cases. And their jurisdiction is what's known as limited. They have limited jurisdiction. Where state courts can essentially hear everything, federal courts can hear a very, very limited amount of cases. Those cases are cases arising under federal law. We're talking about cases that deal with the U.S. Constitution, cases that deal with federal statutes, and cases that deal with things like treaties and things of that nature, federal regulations, so forth. If you have federal law, federal courts have jurisdiction to hear those cases. Now, it's also true that state courts can hear cases involving the Constitution and federal statutes, but really, the federal courts have jurisdiction over the case and can hear all of that stuff. Now, if the claims or the case at issue is not arising under federal law, the second way that federal courts can have jurisdiction to hear a case is through what's known as diversity jurisdiction. Now, diversity jurisdiction is simple. It's when you have a plaintiff and defendant, and they're from different states. Now, when you have that, and you have full diversity where everybody on the plaintiff side and everybody on the defendant side are from different states, then the federal courts are authorized to hear that case, even if it's about state law. So for diversity jurisdiction, you need two things. You need the plaintiff and defendant to be from different states, and you also need the case in controversy, the amount you're seeking, to be more than $75,000. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Amber Heard is claiming that she is not a citizen of any U.S. state. Therefore, she can't be sued under diversity jurisdiction. And her reason is that since diversity jurisdiction requires both parties be citizens of different states, and she's not a citizen of any state, then the diversity jurisdiction is destroyed. Now, you may say, well, hold on, Nate. Isn't Amber Heard a citizen, right? Yes, she is a citizen, but being a citizen of the United States is different than being a citizen of a particular state. So in Amber Heard's case, her claims is that she lives abroad, Spain or England or wherever. She lives abroad. And because she lives abroad, she is not domiciled anywhere in the United States. So the law says if you are a U.S. citizen who lives overseas and do not live in one of the states or not domiciled in one of those states, then for purposes of the diversity jurisdiction, you cannot be holding a court. And there's a famous case that stands for this proposition. Let me pull it up. All right, this is Bruce Greenberg. This is his law firm, and he actually puts this brief for this case, which is extremely on point for what we're going to be talking about. This is Frederick V. Davis from 2014. And listen to the facts of this case. The plaintiff and defendant were both passengers on a plane flying from Philadelphia to Germany. The plaintiff alleged that during the flight, the defendant, while waiting in line to use the restroom, fell on her and broke her arm. So she sued the defendant based on diversity jurisdiction in the United States District Court of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. The plaintiff alleged that she was a citizen of Ohio and that the defendant was a citizen of Pennsylvania. Because of that gave her diversity jurisdiction, allowing the federal court to hear the case. But the defendant moved to dismiss, contending that although he was a citizen of the United States, he was no longer a citizen of Pennsylvania, but instead was domiciled in Germany. So essentially he was like, well, listen, I don't live in any state in the United States, but I'm still a citizen. I just live in Germany. So after discovery on the domicile issue and a hearing, the district court ruled that the defendant was in fact domiciled in Germany, and that as a result, he was, quote, stateless, meaning he didn't live in any of the states of the United States, even though he was a citizen. And therefore, he could not be sued under diversity jurisdiction. And accordingly, that case was dismissed. Now, also, it's interesting to note that the Supreme Court, the Third Circuit, and other circuits have held that an American domiciled abroad while being a citizen of the United States, of course, not domiciled in a particular state, and therefore such a person is stateless for the purposes of diversity jurisdiction. And simply put, a stateless person, those cases stated, cannot be sued in any district based on diversity, since such person is neither a citizen of a state nor a citizen or subject of any foreign state, as required by a diversity jurisdiction. So at this point in time, Amber Heard is saying that, hey, I'm still a citizen, just like this person said in this case, right? I'm still a citizen, but I live in Germany. Amber Heard, I believe, lives in Spain now. So what are some of the issues that are going to have to be resolved in this particular instance? So now to determine whether someone's domiciled either in a state or someplace else, the court's going to look at, do you have car insurance? Do you pay rent? Where do you spend most of your time? So forth. And I think it's very important to note that even though you have property in a place or even have connections in one place, that doesn't mean you're domiciled there, right? You can have people who live overseas who have property here, but they wouldn't say they live here, right? They can have a summer home or something like that. Now, there is something called in rem jurisdiction, so I don't want to get too far into that. But in this particular case, it's really about whether Amber Heard lived in the state of California or any U.S. state at the time when New York Marine filed their lawsuit. Because that's the actual point in which the court has to look to determine if the court has jurisdiction over Amber Heard, is that when New York Marine filed the lawsuit, was she living in a U.S. state different than the state that New York Marine is in, or did she live overseas? Now, what's interesting to note, New York Marine filed their action against Amber Heard on July 8th, 2022. Now, Amber Heard, who did have a home in California at the time, sold her home on July 18th, about 10 days after the lawsuit was filed. So obviously there's going to be some inquiries on whether Amber Heard was living in California at the time this lawsuit was filed. And if she was, then New York Marine will be able to continue with this action. If she was not and had already moved overseas, New York Marine will not be able to do it. So I'm assuming that there's going to be some discovery in this case about whether Amber Heard lived in California at the time the lawsuit was filed by New York Marine, or whether she lived in Europe. And that determination will determine if New York Marine can even file this lawsuit in federal court. So now at the end of the day, what do I think about this particular case? I think this is a fantastic legal argument put forward by her team. It's just very good. It's beautiful because it essentially stops these lawsuits in their tracks against her. And I'm no fan of Amber Heard, but this legal argument is legit. And I think it's likely to win if she can definitively prove that she wasn't domiciled or she didn't live here in the United States at the time the lawsuit was filed. If she can't prove that, then unfortunately, she's probably going to be able to lose. And just because she had a home in California at that particular time and was in the process of selling it is not an automatic that, hey, she was domiciled in California. You're going to need more than that. So with that said, let me know how you feel in the comment section. Even though I think she's probably going to lose her appeal, this, I think, is an interesting legal case in which I think Amber Heard's legal team got it right. And even if they lose on this issue, I think it's a well-pleaded and well-thought-up legal strategy for their client. I think New York Marine may be in trouble because if they can't prove that she lived in California at the time they filed their lawsuit, and if she can prove that she lived outside the United States, then guess what? Game over. Let me know how you feel in the comment section. Let me know if you think my legal reasoning on this case is wrong. You saw the precedent, you see everything. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you next time. Peace.